Amen. Praise be to God. Thank you, Rudy, for keeping us up to date. There's also another little headline here you may not have caught. According to military.com, roughly 99% of active duty members have been vaccinated.
99%.
It's only 98% in the U.S. Army, which doesn't surprise me. They're always trailing behind the Marines. But nonetheless, our good friend R. Davis Younts from YountsLaw.com is on with us this morning to you. Good morning, sir. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Hey, good morning.
Praise be to God. Thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it. So big news, good news, I would say, when I think it was last week, maybe it was the week before, the Pentagon announced they were going to rescind the vaccine mandate, sort of, mostly. But I wanted to get you on the show and talk about that. You've been fighting so vigorously for your clients and for yourself on this story now for the last few years. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and there's a lot of implications from it. The first thing I'll say is, even the headline, the DOD rescinds the mandate, really Congress had to act. Congress had to force the Department of Defense's hand. So some of the analysis we have to do on what's next for our service members starts there, because there's still a great deal of animosity within the Department of Defense at some levels towards anyone who submitted a religious accommodation as it relates to this vaccine. So it is good news. It is a great step in the right direction, but there's a lot more work to do.
So, and I was reading up on this, there's some fine print in all of this, apparently. So yeah, it's rescinded. And so a lot of question marks in our heads. Okay, well, there's a lot of people that have been affected by this. Thousands have been dismissed from the military. What happens to them? What happens to the people who are in the process of being separated from the military for this very reason? Does that get reversed, or so there's so many questions. But when reading the fine print, I guess part of the announcement was, by the way, individual commanders can make decisions that would mandate vaccines for their commands based on circumstances. What do you think about that?
Right. So that really is what we're waiting to see. The Department of Defense has 5 more days. They have a deadline from Congress to issue very specific details regarding policy and what's going to happen. So we've seen the first step, which is from Secretary Austin. Now we're waiting for each branch of the service to come out with more details. But there is fine print when we talk about assignments and everything else. So one of the issues, and there's a lot of issues, but one of the issues as it relates directly to that is this, and it's best to explain it by way of example. I have a client who is an 06, a colonel in the Air Force that was a commander in a leadership position. She was fired from that position for cause, removed from her command position for cause because of her religious accommodation. Her leadership said, we've lost faith and trust in your discernment and ability to lead because of your religious accommodation. So then she received a letter of reprimand. So for example, for her, yes, this rescinding the mandate allows her to finish out her career and get to retirement, but she has this letter of reprimand in her file. She has adverse performance reports because she was removed from command, and she has it on her military record that she was removed from command for cause. So her career has been devastated. The damage because of her religious faith has already been done. So that's just an example of when we start talking about fine print, those are issues we're dealing with. And we don't know what's going to happen to my Navy SEAL clients. We don't know if they're going to be allowed to deploy and start training again, or if they're simply going to be kept in a holding pattern like they have been for the last 18 months.
So what is your best guess? What do you think will happen? Will they get justice?
I think we're going to have to continue to fight for it. I think that the religious freedom cases that are in federal court, I think they need to go to trial. I think we need an answer on whether or not the actions taken by senior leaders in the Department of Defense were religious discrimination. So we need those trials to go forward to get an answer. So there's some level of accountability for the discrimination that's been done. That will help. And then I think it's going to come down to, hopefully it's going to come down to military readiness and necessity, right? Hopefully commanders look at this and say, I need this significant number, dozens and dozens of highly trained, experienced Navy SEALs. I need them back in the fight. I need them ready to go. We need them. I need fighter pilots. I need these pilots back into the fight. So hopefully readiness will prevail over politics, and they will be allowed to continue serving and get back into that status.
The whole issue over readiness triggers so many other things in my mind. Just yesterday, I saw a report that the FAA quietly was reducing the EKG limits for pilots after the COVID vaccines came out, and they started realizing there were issues related to them with heart problems. So they were quietly in the background reducing the level at which a pilot can be considered good to go to fly, and they didn't want anybody to know that. So it's not as though the federal agencies, the governments, or even in this case the Pentagon is naive to all these issues, and yet they have stubbornly held on. And it's not just a policy we're fighting over. It's people's lives, let alone the readiness and our capability to defend our people, our country, or achieve our goals militarily. That should outrage America.
No, listen, you're absolutely right. And that's why I emphasize the fact that it was Congress that had to act to force the Department of Defense to rescind this mandate. Why is that so critical? The issue is a constitutional one. The Department of Defense is part of the executive branch. The job of the executive branch is to execute the law as it's written by Congress, as it's established in our Constitution. And with this vaccine mandate, we had the Department of Defense that was doing two things. One, ignoring federal law that says you cannot discriminate against the religious. They've been ignoring the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, but they've also been ignoring the protections that Congress put in place after so many service members were damaged by the bad batches of the anthrax vaccine. They put rules in place. There's legislation in place that says you cannot force military members to receive an EUA product. There are similar rules with the FAA. They're not supposed to allow pilots to take a product that hasn't been out for a certain period of time and hasn't been tested. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. So you're absolutely right. This fight has been about religious freedom, but it's also health and safety. And it's also to protect people who just want to ask the question. Can't we just ask the question, what are the long-term health and safety benefits of this new product that's never been tried before? And the answer is we have no idea, and we haven't had transparency, and we've had anyone with a counter opinion trying to get additional information out there censored repeatedly. So you see that readiness issue all throughout the military. We have 96%, 98%, whatever number we want to look at and talk about, and the numbers seem to shift a lot, who have now received this experimental product. And I have clients and I have people reaching out to me on a daily basis that are suffering from vaccine injuries. They're suffering from brand new health problems that appear to be directly tied to these that they've never experienced before. And they're the best of the best. They're elite military members who are suffering from the consequences of this.
Mr. Younts, we're coming up to a break here, but I'm curious. The people who held out, there's been court cases that have reestablished, outside of the military, of course, reestablished people who were formerly employed for a company, and they've brought them back, maybe gave them back pay. Will any of the military members who held out on this vaccine mandate, will they get back pay or anything like that?
It looks like we're going to have to go to court to do that. And there's a few different issues to speak to there. One of the problems we see is for those that have been kicked out over the vaccine mandate, and many of those are people that filed a religious accommodation request that was denied. Mm-hmm. Then they were given an order to receive the vaccine, and then they were pushed out after that. They received an adverse separation. So they received a less than honorable, a general discharge, and their DD-214, that all-important document that says I served in the military, says on it, the reason you're separated is for misconduct, commission of a serious offense.
Hold that thought. R. Davis Younts is our guest. We're talking about these issues related to our men and women who serve us in the military. YountsLaw.com is his website. We're going to be right back. More. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to Catholic Drive Time, keeping you informed and inspired. I'm your host, Joe McClane. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. R. Davis Younts is our guest, YountsLaw.com. That's YOUNTS, YountsLaw.com. I like your description. Christian, husband, homeschool dad, and former military officer providing strategic legal guidance and expert criminal defense to military, federal law enforcement, and other patriots. That's good stuff right there. Woo. Welcome back to the show, R. Davis Younts. Let's go back to readiness for a second. Recruiting numbers are at an all-time low. I mean, they are scraping the bottom of the barrel lowering the bar, and it was already not like high. Okay, it was
so much so that they even implemented people who are not ready. They put them in a program to get them even to basic training.
I mean, when I enlisted Marine Corps, 17. Raised my right hand, swore an oath to defend the Constitution. I was already overweight. I had to lose, I don't remember how many pounds. So I was exercising 7 days a week. I mean, I think my recruiter allowed me to eat, I don't remember, 1,000 calories a day. I mean, it was so terrible, right? Wow. And I squeaked by just to get to go to boot camp. It was such hard work. So already the bar was not stellar for at least the enlisted rank. But now they're lowering it even more, and they're still not able to really they're offering bonuses and everything else, and they're just not able to fill those numbers. And they're stubbornly still trying to persist down this road, punishing men and women who've said they have a religious exemption to getting this shot or other issues. How do you see that from that perspective?
So I kind of see two issues going on. I think what we have to really seriously look at, what we have to consider and what we have to be focused on is how we've lost trust, right? Military families, look at the articles that say generational families that have 2 and 3 generations that have served in the military are now telling their children, I don't want you to serve. Don't go in. There's been there's just a lack of trust in the military and senior leaders in the military right now. So that's a huge issue. But then you have a military that what we're doing to recruit the best and the brightest that we need to serve in the military is constantly lowering the standards and being very vocal about lowering the standards. So I have concerns about that as well, just as a concept. It's not a concept of, like you did, lose weight, get in shape, strive for something better because you knew boot camp was going to be a challenge, right? Regardless of where you were at before you got there, you have to work hard to get through it, and not everyone does. And I think we need some of that back. We need this idea that we need men with chests, right? C.S. Lewis. We need this idea of real people dedicated serving for the right reasons. But everything we're doing in the military feels like, and some of it's so politicized, but it feels like it's against that. It's against those people who really want to serve for the right reasons with integrity. And it's so much of it feels like a social experiment or forcing a medical experiment with an experimental product on our military members. And
we've been witnessing firsthand the get woke, go broke thing happening in our military these last few years. They're embracing all manner of social perversities and ideologies that have nothing to do with military readiness, nothing to do with being able to achieve, to fight, to win, and achieve these objectives, to defend our people, our Constitution, our country. It just seems utterly bizarre to waste taxpayer dollars on a social experiment.
Right. And that's the question. What is the purpose of our military? Our purpose of our military is to defend our nation, to fight and wage our nation's wars, to protect the innocent. That's our responsibility. And readiness is the key to that. But if we're taking more and more time, investing more and more money and bureaucracy and efforts into woke training, into how to properly put your pronouns in an email, and even some of the anti-extremism training that we've seen was so twisted. It was so anti just service and core values and everything else that has had a devastating effect. And I can tell you with my clients who've gone through this battle over the vaccine, it is about broken trust and morale is low. It's not even about the vaccine in the near term. It's a bigger picture of whatever the issue is, why is the military forcing something rather than respecting constitutional rights and religious freedom? Why are they forcing something rather than following the law? Congress passed a law that says you cannot force an experimental project, an emergency use product on the military. That whole issue in the law, that federal statute's just been ignored by military leadership who said, no, we're going to do this anyway. And the answer is always, well, someone higher up told me we have to do this. Someone higher up told me we have to do this. So those are the issues that I'm seeing, and that's my concern moving forward for the military.
Mr. Younts, I was just thinking about your reference to the abolition of man, and I think that's a great point because I'm just thinking of Colonel Ripley and whenever he had to fight against a lot of the immoral things that were happening in the military during his time after Vietnam. and he made a statement saying, moral courage is much harder than having courage on the battlefield. He said many men that he knew that would be the most courageous men on the battlefield would had bullets whizzing past them, and they didn't stop, didn't blink twice, and they kept moving forward. Once they got home, once they were back on base, it was, I'm just obeying orders. It was, I can't stand up against this, or I don't want to be shunned by the world. What do you think about having moral courage and these men? Yeah, there's a lot to lose, but perhaps we need people who are willing to lose.
No, that's absolutely right. We need a military that is filled with men and women of integrity and character that understand the Constitution, understand the role of our military in our nation's history, the purpose of our military in our nation, and that are willing to take a stand for the right things and are willing to put that over their career. If we reward milquetoast leaders who are just good bureaucrats and good administrators, we're not going to see that reflected. And it is an issue we see throughout all levels of our military. But I think the encouraging thing I see is this: because of their faith, because of their religious convictions, there have been thousands and thousands of military members that have been willing to make a stand. Now, a lot have been discharged, others left early, retired early, voluntarily got out. But the reality is, it has caused a small revival, and it has caused people to ask questions. And still, slowly over time, every case I do, every time I interact with a group of people, we do see people whose hearts and minds are at least open or changed. And we have opportunities to share this truth of Scripture, the gospel of Christ, in this moment. So that's the encouraging part to me, is that we have seen moral courage, and we have seen the impact it can have.
Let's talk about some of those numbers. According to this military.com article, says data compiled by the military as of early December, the Marine Corps has led the services, it's typical, with 3,717 Marines discharged. There have been 2,041 discharged from the Navy, 1,841 from the Army, and 834 from the Air Force. The Air Force data includes the Space Force. Well, my question is for you, R. Davis Younts, is how come the Marine Corps got hit so hard with these discharges?
I think it's a Marine culture in some respects. The Marines are smaller, leaner, and more efficient at a lot of things they do, and we see that reflected in these numbers.
It seems utterly bizarre to me. And a minute ago, you talked about how there was a portion of people who just said, you know what, I'm out of here, I'm done. Officers can resign commissions. Enlisted folks, it's a little different. But do you have a sense, can you give us a sense of how many men and women left the service voluntarily before it got this bad, before it got to the point where they were being booted?
I don't know for sure. It kind of takes a deep dive at statistical analysis. We know before the new year, at one point there was as many as 260,000, according to the Department of Defense.
Wow.
260,000 across the force that were not fully vaccinated and were at some stage of a refusal. If we have only discharged around 9,000 so far, there's a huge unanswered percentage. There's a huge delta there of people who reached the end of their enlistment contract or were able to resign their commission, and a lot that left under other circumstances, retired earlier than they intended to, voluntarily got out early, got out for medical reasons. So there's a huge number. There's a huge number of people, some very, very highly qualified pilots and others, some of my clients that have left. That's a hard number to capture.
Golly whiz, makes you think. I really hope we don't get any major wars anytime soon, because who knows what would be the result of that. And with all of these nefarious actors trying to, kick off World War III at any moment, boy, this is not the best time to have something like this. I saw that there was an effort back in December, along with the funding bill, to have a rider that would reinstate some 8,000 troops that have been booted, but that got kicked to the curb. Again, seems just really stubborn, unnecessarily so.
Again, I agree with that. And that's the trust issue that we see. And even Secretary Austin's memo, a lot of people, when you talk about the fine print, don't understand the implications. But it's like, it says in there, hey, if you're been discharged or there's something wrong with your career, you can always go to the Board of Corrections for military records. Well, the problem with that is it takes at least 2 years typically to get any sort of relief from the Board of Corrections. So when I said earlier about your DD 214 that says, hey, commission of a serious offense, misconduct, makes it really hard to get a job, all of those service members in that situation, all my clients, we're going to be fighting for 2 years at least with the Board of Corrections to try to get those things fixed. And there's no guarantee of winning. So we really do need that bill to be revived in Congress, because I have zero confidence that the Department of Defense or the services are going to do anything to make that right. And all those people that were kicked out simply because they did not get this vaccine because of their DD 214, right now they're ineligible to reenlist. They can't serve. They have a reentry code that prevents them from doing that.
Wow. Well, we're just about out of time here, but can I ask you, what would your advice be to somebody who's in this category? They are maybe looking at being separated. They're maybe they're like, if you're a Marine, you're probably in Camp Pendleton right now waiting to be discharged. What do you do if you're them?
I think you have to make sure you understand your rights. You have to read paperwork carefully. Make sure you're consulting with military defense services that should be made available to you. Ask those questions. And the biggest thing is keep track of everything. Keep track of your own record. Don't allow anybody to not give you copies of everything, so that when you're out, if you have to go to the Board of Corrections, you have personally on hand that stack of paperwork, those service records, so that people like me can work with you to try to make it right.
All right. Well, R. Davis Younts, younts.law.com is his website, YOUNTS law.com. If you know somebody who might be in this category and fighting for their service in our U.S. military, you might reach out, younts.law.com, YOUNTS law.com. R. Davis Younts, God bless you. God love you. Thank you for your time.
God bless you.
Have a great day. All right. That is going to do it for hour number one.